And there is a connection between those who finance them or with those who help them to still to sustain this ability of training, of providing them with weapons. So these are the issues we know. Whether there are big numbers of the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan now, or in Pakistan, or where they are and how they function, this is a technical question. But the threat is there, the threat is real, and Al-Qaeda is waiting for any possible moment if there is a vacuum to fill it. And they filled such a vacuum in tribal areas of Pakistan, and they will do it if Afghanistan is not stabilized. They will fill the gap there also.
We also know there's great concern in this country about the level of corruption in Afghanistan. In fact, according to Transparency International, I think Afghanistan was rated number 2, and Somalia, I gather, is number 1. How can this really be dealt with? Do you see this new expansion or upsurge in American troops helping in that regard?
There is a dimension for another dimension for the American surge. That's the civilian dimension, which includes helping or creating a space for good governance or for governance, and also helping the Afghan institutions to work better. Corruption is a big issue. President Karzai, in his inaugurational speech, committed himself to fight against corruption very seriously. The first steps are underway, and that how to create a new body with court, police of its own, and all enforcement means to put the corrupt elements, whether they're in the government or outside the government, whether they're part of government or private sector, or they're active around in trials, put them in court. So it is a serious issue. I mean, the willingness is there, the commitment is there, but this issue is not an issue that has come to Afghanistan overnight. We went through all these years of disintegration of state, disintegration of the law enforcement entities in Afghanistan. The society was broken. A war culture was brought into the country. Warlordism, drugs, and terrorism, all working together. Working, and as a nexus it contributes to corruption in Afghanistan. And our attempts for building or rebuilding the state still faced in the last 8 years difficulties. So you can't fight against corruption effectively if you don't have a police force efficient enough to deal with it, or a judiciary system that efficiently to be able to deal with it. And in this case, when in today's situation, when the international community is there, when there's 62 donor countries, 43 military contributors, and the international community is there, and aid money is there, not only the drugs money or other sources of financial corruptions. So you have to work together also. The Afghan government, for example, is controlling, when it comes to the aid money, the international money, 20% of the money. The international community oversees 80% of the aid money. So it means that the international community is accountable for 80% of fight against corruption. So how this fight against corruption can be only a fight for the Afghan government? It should be a fight for the international community, for the Afghan government. It should be done together. And then also we have to look into sources. Without success in our fight against drug economy, without working together how to spend and use the aid money, and also how to reinforce the government institutions that are responsible for rule of law in the country. So you can't succeed alone. It takes time, but I have to repeat that the willingness is there, the commitment is there, and we have to work together.
So, Ambassador, you think that this new approach, which comprises both a military and a civilian aspects, will help? I mean, it will add much more to this fight against corruption and help your government and help the international agencies to better deal with all of this than the status quo?
I think if the civilian surge is about helping the government of Afghanistan to be able to implement the rule of law, if the civilian surge is about the Afghan institutions and Afghan government to be strong enough to deal with these issues with enough resources or sufficient resources, of course that's going to work. So it depends on what do we mean by civilian surge, how we can help the Afghan government. You need to create, first of all, a security space that enable the government to implement the rule of law. I mean,
so security
governance is the main issue,
right.
And then in the center of that issue is fight against corruption. But you can't have a better governance. You can't have rule of law in a way that is needed if there is not a minimum security space. So all these things are related to each other. And we can't pick up one issue and say that this is the index where Afghanistan is on the top, right, after Somalia or any country, any other country, and then say that should be the only issue. No, it is the main issue, but it's not the only issue. It's related to all efforts together, and it needs shared, sincere efforts.
Security will reinforce and help strengthen the fight against corruption and terrorism and all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And one final question, Ambassador. What do you think would happen if the status quo stayed on? In other words, if the surge was not authorized, where would things stand?
It's a hypothetical question.
Of course.
And I'm not a military expert. I think when I look into the new strategy of the United States and the idea of surge, I'm looking into the totality of this strategy. The totality of this strategy is not about increase of force, but it's about protection of people, centrality of the security of Afghan people, development, and also reconciliation on the one hand, and on the other hand, improvement the governance in the country. So this is a strategy where not only the United States forces, but also the civilian institutions, international institutions, and Afghan government have their roles. So let's look into it in that way.
I see. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to your return as developments occur.
Thank you.
This has been iCastNews.com, live and direct from the United Nations. I'm Linda FASULO.